coming this afternoon. My name's John Giegengek. I'm the founder of a company called Hub Entertainment Research. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is kind of the state of the TV industry, the TV and video entertainment industry, from a standpoint of what consumers are doing and why they're doing it. So just a little bit of background on the company. I started this company about 5 years ago. We focus on the intersection of entertainment and technology. So everything that technology is doing to change how people find, choose, and consume TV or film or video entertainment content of any kind. We kind of our claim to fame, I guess, is a series of reports we publish called the Hub Reports that come out 6 times a year. And that's all consumer research among regular people about what they're doing, why they're doing it. Our clients for those studies are all of the big, or almost all of the big TV networks, the big cable and satellite TV distributors. Increasingly, we're doing work for MCNs or for other online video platforms. We also work for the different SVODs and also some hardware companies like Apple or like Adobe. Pretty much anybody who has a stake in what people are watching and how that content gets onto their screen and how they choose which ones to watch. So what I'm going to show you today is going to take data from across about a half dozen of the studies that we've done. But my goal is to have you hopefully leave here maybe understanding a little bit better from a macro level how people are behaving, why they're doing it, and also understand why we think there's such a huge opportunity right now for independent content, a bigger opportunity than there has ever been before. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is called least objectionable TV, the death of least objectionable television. That's kind of an old industry term, which I would be willing to bet no one in here has heard before. If you have, raise your hand and anyway. But yeah, so what he was saying essentially, the rest of them are louder than that. He was talking about this idea that people choose the medium. What they want to do is, the first concern is that they want to watch television. The secondary concern is what they're actually watching. So the least objectionable programming is built around the idea that in order to be successful, you only have to have the least bad thing on the screen at any point in time to win an audience. And that's really for decades, that's been the case. And you know, I make the case that you can really trace back a lot of the challenges that the TV industry, the video entertainment industry is going through today, all stem back to that same idea of least objectionable programming. Certainly the content, if all you have to make is the least bad show at Thursday night at 8 o'clock, that's what you're going to make. To make anything more or better than that would be a poor investment usually. We can see it in customer service. Comcast, at least historically, has been kind of the poster child for this, but all the MVPDs are pretty bad. Where, not surprisingly, they didn't spend a lot of money on really delighting customers who didn't have any other choice about where to get their service from. And we can see the same thing with the rollout of new technology. A lot of people forget the fact that the MVPDs, the cable companies of the world, had hundreds or thousands of video-on-demand movies way before Netflix ever did, but they just never bothered to make it easier or fun to use. You had this arrow scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. Just making it something that people actually wanted was not a priority because they had no choice. Now, of course, with the internet, consumers have control. So with that broadband pipe into everyone's home, or most people, about 80% in the US, people can make their own choices about what they watch and when they watch it and who they get it from and what they pay, or if they pay at all in some cases. And so that's had really fundamental impact on just about everything about the TV industry that until a few years ago operated in a bit of a technological bubble for about 45 years. A lot of the evolution that other industries are going through, the TV industry was very insulated from that. All of that change now is happening at an even more fundamental level, compressed into a really short period of time. So it's a time of huge challenge, but it's also a time of huge opportunity because consumers are breaking these habits that they've had for generations, literally, for the very first time. So people that figure out how to fill those needs better are in a great position to win a huge audience. It's really, literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for individuals, for companies, for brands to do that. So what I'm going to talk about today is how these changes have changed the way people consume TV, how it's changed the way they discover shows or content and figure out what they're going to watch, how it's impacted the sources that people use first and most often, and then how it's changed the very definition of what watching TV means to people, how they think about that differently, and what that means for people, especially for people that produce independent content. So looking at TV behaviors, probably a lot of you guys have seen this. This is John Landgraf from FX, who's one of our clients. He talks about this now at the TV Critics Association Award, this idea of peak content. So this is the estimated number of scripted original series that are produced, have been produced each year. This doesn't count unscripted, it doesn't count content that's on YouTube. This is just regular scripted TV series on broadcast cable or one of the big S5s usually. So it's climbed from 216 in 2010 to over 500 are predicted to be produced this year. If you're a consumer, not only is there more content to choose from, but the platforms that are actually delivering this to you are proliferating at an order of magnitude higher than we've ever seen before. There are all the normal brands that are branching out, like DirecTV Now, HBO Now. There's the big S5s that are now not new anymore, they're pretty familiar, like Netflix or Hulu or Amazon. There are multi-channel networks, Studio 71, Maker Studios, there's live TV now from YouTube and Hulu. There's a huge, and none of these things, by the way, operate very consistently. There's a lot of difference between them. As you can imagine, combined with the amount of content that we see, the picture that consumers get is just hyper-fragmented. There's options, and in fact so many options that it's hard to figure out where to start sometimes. So one interesting thing about this is that we've heard a lot of people saying for years that this is going to be the death of pay TV. And certainly we are reading in the news about more people cutting their cable cord completely, but in reality the vast majority of people still have either a cable or a satellite or a telco TV subscription. The data I'm showing you here, this is only among people who have broadband at home. And it's also only among engaged TV viewers. So to qualify for this particular survey, you had to watch at least 5 hours of TV a week. If we looked at people who don't watch that much TV, the incidence of cord cutting would be higher. But still, those are people who aren't really that engaged in television anyway. So a lot of those folks would cut if the internet and Netflix had never been invented. So a lot of people, relatively few people, fewer than you might expect, are cutting the cord. But this is what the number was when we started in 2013, so it hasn't really dropped appreciably. But even though they're not cutting the cord, what people are doing is they're taking a lot of their TV time that used to be spent solely with pay TV, with live TV, their DVR, video on demand, and they're putting that onto online options. So among pay TV subscribers, 2/3 of them today subscribe to Netflix, Amazon, or Hulu. Many subscribe to more than one of those, as I'll show you in a minute. And another big shift is that now when someone watches a piece of scripted programming, it's far more likely across people aged 16 to 64, so not just among young people, it's far more likely that they're more likely to be watching it time shifted in some way than they are to be watching it live. So when we started tracking this 5 years ago, it was up around 56 or 57% of shows were watched live. That's dropped steadily. And especially among young people, if we look at those 18 to 34, only a little bit more than 1/3 of shows that they watch are watched live. So time-shifted programming is very much kind of the default way that people view now. A huge thing, obviously, that's happened is S5 platforms, and especially Netflix, and it's not just because of the number of subscribers that they have, but it's because of the way that Netflix almost single-handedly has redefined the way that people watch and how they feel, what their goal is when they sit down to watch something. So this is, in our most recent survey, 61% of everybody in the survey said they subscribe to Netflix, 36% said they subscribe to Amazon, which is almost double what it was last year. And that's people that actually have Amazon Prime but also use it to watch video, so it excludes the people that only use it to get their sneakers and paper towels and stuff shipped to them. Hulu, up 22%, that was only 14% last year, so Hulu was really climbing quickly. But the really interesting thing is when you look at how people are using these in tandem. So among everybody, pay TV or non, 2/3 of people subscribe to at least one of those platforms. 38% of people have 2 or more. Last year that was only 26%. And 14% of everybody say they use all 3 of those platforms. In households with kids, it's 22%. So just think about that for a minute. In 1/4 of all the households with kids, they watch content from Netflix and Hulu and Amazon, on top of whatever else that they have. So it gives you an idea that even though pay TV, the raw number of subscribers isn't necessarily dropping as fast as everyone might say, the share of time that's available, all these things that are proliferating, the number of shows, the number of platforms, the amount of time that people have to spend watching TV is about the same. So that time is in much greater demand. There's a lot more competition. The bar for how they spend it is a lot higher. And all of these companies and all of these creators have to compete more viciously for every minute that they can get. And this applies to the types of content that people are watching too. So I'm going to show you kind of some traditional forms of content here, but in a minute I'm going to get into YouTube videos and that sort of content. So we asked people who say they watch online originals, so that's either an online original show created by one of these online companies or a show or a property that they have exclusive access to, like Netflix with the Star Wars movies. So among people who watch that kind of content at all, half of them say I'm watching that more than a year ago, only 8% say they're watching it less. And that aligns with a similar increase in how people say they're spending their time on these SVOD platforms. So if you talk to people who have Netflix, more than half of them say they're watching it more than a year ago, only 8% say they're watching it less. 2/3 of people who have Hulu say they're watching it more now than a year ago. More than half of people who have Amazon say they're watching it more now than a year ago. So again, the impact these platforms are having is not just the number of subscribers they're getting, but the amount of disposable time that they're vacuuming up. And all of this, especially SVODs, has a really big impact on how people even think about watching television. So we have a bunch of questions that we ask that are kind of attitudinal. So how do people feel about watching TV? So the way that they see this question is we ask them, when you sit down to watch, my goal is they see these two different poles, and then there's a slider in between, so they can slide that slider on their screen back and forth to say where in that continuum they feel like they fall. So those two, that captures their response on an 11-point scale, so a 0 to 10. The red circle is the number of people who had a 0, 1, or 2, so they will weigh on the end of the continuum that says, I search for something specific, I already know what I want to watch when I sit down. The blue number is the number of people who say that they want to browse, so when I sit down, I don't necessarily know what I'm going to watch yet, but I'm going to find my way to something that I'll enjoy. Among older folks, it's much more heavily kind of that appointment viewing, that way that folks my age at least are used to watching TV back in the day. Of something that you want to see, you sit down, you find it, and you consume it. Among younger people, it's the opposite. And you can see the reason they don't add up is that everybody that falls into the middle is not reflected in those two circles, but at least people that are on these extremes, younger people are a little bit more likely to say that they're browsing. And a big reason for this is Netflix. Netflix has taken, they get a lot of attention for their original series now, but people maybe sometimes forget that Netflix was built on the content equivalent of that big blue bucket at Walmart that's full of all the DVDs that nobody wants, and you can get them for like $4.99. That was their whole library when they got started. But what they did is they took it, they organized it, they made it graphical and fun to look at, and they conditioned people to this idea that no one had ever really thought about before, was that if you have a huge library of stuff, even if it's not the best known, if there's a lot there and you have a good system to find your way around, I will be able to find something that I enjoy. So, and that people have really adopted that, and they live it now. And one of the side effects of this is that network brands used to have a lot of impact on what people watch. These days, they're not such a big factor. So this is another one of those continual questions. We say when you're thinking about deciding if you're going to watch a show or not, how much of a difference does what network the show appears on? The number of people who say it doesn't make any difference is about 3 times bigger than the people who say it makes a really big difference. And there's obviously exceptions to that. There's some networks that have really powerful brands. But some of the best known brands, like the big broadcast networks, for example, the brands themselves are well known, but there's not a really clear identity of what sort of programming that they stand for. The networks that are still doing the best often in linear TV are the ones where the network brand and the type of content you find are almost synonymous. So like PBS, HGTV, ESPN, those kinds of brands have it easier than really big behemoth brands like NBC that used to be, they're the most recognized, but it's hard to identify what comes underneath it. And again, SVODs are not helping out too much here. When we talk to people, we ask them a show that they watched on Netflix in this case, they tell us the name of the show. If it's a licensed show, we say, which which network created that show in the first place and give them a list to choose from, and only 40%, 41% of people actually knew where that came from. So there's a lot of people that think Netflix made The Walking Dead. They watched it there, they watched all the seasons there. Sons of Anarchy was actually the most likely to be misassigned. And Netflix, because they have a huge, usually they get all the full season stacking rights and all the old seasons, so there's more of that show available there than anywhere else. All this content is also giving people, it's a total first world problem to have, and it didn't take people very long to get kind of jaded by all of these options, but now people say that it's hard to figure out what to watch. So 2/3 of people say that their biggest technology need is a universal listing, something that will show them shows that are on across all of the different platforms they have available. And more than half of people say there's so many shows it's hard to know where to start. So here's a guy talking about, he came up with this term decision paralysis. It sounds like he's talking about a TV show, but it's not.
Describe for me an episode of decision paralysis. Like, what is that? What happens? What's it feel like?
So it's, well, when there's decision paralysis is when it's like, oh, let's watch the Netflix. What do you want to watch? Well, I don't know. What do you want to watch? And then you scroll through Netflix looking at all the top shows, the best dramas, the worst thrillers, and you're just like, wow, there's a lot you could watch. And then you start the process of trying to narrow it down to what eventually you watch. Usually it happens when you're with someone else.
Yeah.
When I'm by myself, I'll throw on whatever. And I don't feel conflicted because there's no dissonance between me and the person I'm sitting experiencing that show along with, versus when I'm by myself, I have less of a barrier.
People are overwhelmed by the number of options that they have, especially because a lot of them the quality is so high now. There's so many good shows, the quality of the shows is better, and there's so many more of them. Another reason that short form content has taken off so much is that they're short. And I'll talk about this in more detail in a minute, but the idea of engaging in another show, especially with so many people that like binge viewing, when you're confronted with, depending on what the show is, you might see 22 one-hour episodes of a drama. Like, the amount of an investment of time there is to make there is daunting to many people, especially when there's anything else you could want. It's just a click away. So a few years ago, we talked to people about this, and they're like, this is the best thing ever, and now the blush is off the rose a little bit to where it's starting to, they want somebody to solve that, and it gets behind a lot of their decisions about what they watch on the platforms they use. Another huge thing is that people are much pickier about where their disposable time goes now. So 79% of people agree moderately or strongly with the statement that today more of my total TV time is spent on shows I really like than in the past. And almost 60% of people say that they choose platforms that make it easy to find new shows. So that's one of the biggest things that dictates whether they use A, B, or C, regardless of what the content is on either one of them. And here's a guy talking about that.
I consider my TV time valuable because it's limited now. So I want to watch something that's worthwhile. I know it's got some production value to it. And that I know that I'm going to enjoy.
This particular guy and a ton of people are also kind of serial monogamists, at least when it comes to long form scripted shows, where they find a show that they like and they binge view it and then they go on to the next show. So about 68% of everybody says that they binge view 3 or more episodes of the same show back to back to back, at least occasionally. Among younger people, it's about 80%. And the implications of that are huge. One of the biggest ones is that linear TV, at least, isn't set up to deliver content that way. The other big implication is that the stakes for TV discovery are so much higher, because it used to be that you're competing for someone's attention from Thursday night at 8 till Thursday night at 9. Now you might be competing for someone's attention from Thursday night at 8 until 2 Thursdays from now at 8 until they, when they work their way through whatever it is that they're watching. So that completely changes which parts of the selection process are the most important, where the stakes are the highest, and how people's time, which we already talked about, is more, there's more competition for it. Even so, they're allocating that time in bigger chunks to individual shows that they really like. One of the analogies we use, or I use it because I have a lot of Girl Scouts in my house, but it's like those Thin Mints. You guys familiar with that? All right, so no one at the Girl Scouts of America was like, I got an idea, let's take these Thin Mints, instead of in that big sleeve that you stay up late and eat them all after midnight, like mail them out like one a week, wrapped up. I mean, they would do that and people would still eat all the Thin Mints you sent them, but in the meantime, they would be eating other stuff. And the way that they, people treat TV shows the same way. They find something that they really, really like and they consume it until it's gone because it's good and because it also delays that having to find something new to watch, which we already talked about, is sort of it's a growing hassle for them. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of YouTube, and some of the data I'm going to show you includes data from other platforms besides YouTube, but this is sort of the biggest, where most of this activity happens. So people are spending a lot of time on this. This data, we actually have another study in the field right now that's going to refresh this, so this data is from several months ago. But 90% of people, 16 to 24, say they watch some kind of video, YouTube, at least once a week. 53% say they watch it every day. And 2/3 of people in that age group say they subscribe to at least one creator. Most of them subscribe to a lot more than that, but 2/3 of people at least have watched it enough and are engaged enough that they're actively following people who produce that content, which is the kind of engagement, that's the holy grail of TV and video and entertainment in general. This is some data from just a few weeks ago. This is looking at some of the top categories of videos that people watch. So when they took the survey, there was a longer definition than this. I'm just shortening it down to the main headlines. But the most commonly mentioned one was music videos. In the top 7 here, the bottom one was online series with hosts, so more than half of people said they watch those. More than 2/3 of people watch online video series. One of the really interesting things, though, is if we compare this to when we asked the same questions in 2016, that's the growth. So there's been huge growth across all of these categories. But one really interesting thing is that traditional TV companies look at this and see competition, and they're right, but there's also some things here that show that it can be a really valuable tool in that difficult TV discovery process that we talked about. Two of the categories that have grown the most are clips from TV shows, so that's at 76% of people said they watch those, and those are clips from shows that are on regular TV. That was only 39% last time, so that's close to doubled. Online extras from TV shows, so that's content that's related to a show that's on the air now, but didn't necessarily appear on that show. That's gone up like 400%. Now, certainly some of that is due to the fact that traditional networks are putting more of that content online, but it's also something that people are really taking to. A really good sort of use case for it is looking at the late night talk shows where you have to, not only you have to get someone to tune in live, you probably have to get at least some of those people to stay up later than they normally stay up to watch it. So there's some logistical hurdles in the way. Those shows lend themselves really well to clips. The networks have been putting a ton of clips from those shows onto YouTube because it's getting the show and the property and the content in front of people who might not otherwise see it. And in all of our research, there's tons and tons of evidence that one of the few ways that's still effective to create live TV viewers is to get content in front of them online where they can watch it at their own schedule and get engaged enough that they're actually interested enough to tune in on someone else's schedule to watch it and watch advertising. All this consumption of video, some of it's coming at the expense of regular TV. So the blue bar is how many hours these people estimate themselves that they spend in a week watching native digital stuff on YouTube or similar platforms. The green is how many hours they told us they watch regular TV. And naturally, not naturally, but as you get younger, the amount of time spent watching native digital video goes up. The amount of time spent watching regular TV content goes down, but it doesn't go down that much. You can see that really a lot of this activity is additive. So it's taken time away from social media, it's taken time away maybe from video games, it's probably taken time away from a lot of the other things like I said in the video at the beginning, like talking to your family or whatever else you might be doing. So it is reducing somewhat the amount of traditional TV that's watched, but mostly people are just consuming more video, and video entertainment has never been better, at least as far as a form of entertainment in the minds of consumers go. It really is kind of the golden age of television. And some really interesting stuff is this is from some research that we did for an MCN to kind of substantiate why it is that people like this kind of content. So these are the percent of people who attributed each of these attributes to the kinds of content that they watch. So a strong majority of people say that YouTube videos across all those categories, the fact that they're short is a benefit. If they can fit it into available time, they can fit it into occasions where just regular TV shows are not an option. People have a perception that they're more genuine, so that one we defined as created by people like me, not by big companies, by big brands. People think they're more inventive, so they kind of break the paradigm of a regular TV show. They really like the fact that for most of them, there's new content produced more often than just once a week or whatever the normal breakfast series is. A lot of these folks are producing it every day. People really enjoy that. Because there are so many options to look for, people find this content more relevant to their interests because they can, whatever the most hyper-specific interest you could have, you can find more content in that category than you have time to consume. And they like that they're independent, so they have at least a perception that when these personalities are endorsing products, that they're not getting, they're doing it because they really believe in it, and not because they're getting paid to do it. In the occasions where people have found out later that they really were getting paid to endorse a product, the backlash has been massive. We've seen a lot of that in lots of industries, but like video gaming is a big one where it's a bit of a counterculture on the internet anyway, and they don't want to feel like they're in the pocket of big business. So the fact that they're independent and trustworthy is something that makes it really appealing, and it's also something really, really important for brands that want to get involved in this to keep in mind. It's a golden goose that is a little vulnerable to being bruised or killed. You have to be careful with how you invest in them. If you're a creator, you have to be really careful that you kind of preserve that image that people have and don't take it for granted. And again, the reasons that brands like this content, if people are using a platform that lets them fast forward, so a DVR, or if they're on one of the few video on demand platforms that hasn't disabled fast forward yet, 86% of people say they fast forward through the ads most or all the time. When we talk to people who watch digital first, native digital videos, 48% of people, we asked them, we said, how would you feel if you found out that a big brand, acquired or partnered with one of your favorite personalities? And half the people said that they would feel good about it, not just they would tolerate it, but they'd actually think it was okay if all of those other properties were preserved. And a third of people say that they watch less regular TV today because of the time they spend watching YouTube videos. So at least as far as the advertising portion of traditional TV companies' revenue model goes, YouTube is definitely, they perceive it as squeezing, and YouTube personalities are looking like a more and more attractive place all the time to put that advertising dollar. So I'm actually going to finish a little bit early, so you guys can ask me questions at the end, or go have a drink. There's some conclusions. So TV itself is not dead. Least objectionable programming was around for a long time, but that is totally dead. It's done. Consumers have a ton of options. All of those options they're not new anymore. People really know how to use them, and they're using them. But they have the same amount of disposable TV time, and as a result, their standards, the bar any new show or piece of content has to clear before they'll try it out, has never been higher. They have that limited time, and their assumption is that every bit of that time is going to be spent on something that they're really engaged with. Content is still king, and it's kingier than ever. People love TV more than they ever have before. TV as a business is definitely experiencing some growing pains, but TV, the product, is doing awesome. People feel like there's more shows. People feel like the quality of those shows is much higher, and it is. They have a wider range of creators to choose from. So Netflix, at the beginning, started off as a technology company that distributed content that other people made. They spent a ton of time and money to position themselves as an entertainment company. Their first really big original, you remember, was House of Cards. The number of people who watched that is under a cloak of secrecy, but a lot of evidence indicates that it's not really that high. But they spent a boatload of money on it, and they did was to reposition themselves as an entertainment company, kind of the way that like Dodge used to do a lot of ads that had a Dodge Viper in them, even though there was like 2,500 of those a year. You couldn't really buy one if you wanted to, but it made people feel better about their Charger or their minivan. It transformed the brand. And that's how, that's really how Netflix approaches it with a lot of these high-profile shows, is to make people think about them as an entertainment company, and it's totally worked. When we ask questions about, say that there's a new TV show coming out, which of these brands would you be the most interested in if you knew that was the one creating it? And then we'd say an hour-long drama. In some cases, we'd even use like a fictional. We found some old like pilot summaries from shows like 15 years ago and put those in. Usually like a cop buddy show or this and this and this. Like, who would you feel the most excited about? Netflix and HBO are the two brands that make people the most interested, that drive the highest assumptions that it'll be a good show. Netflix came out on top even in some categories where at the time they didn't even have a show. So like a competition reality show, they're like, oh, Netflix would make a great competition reality show. Netflix, when we asked that question, they didn't make any competition reality shows. So it's just, they've done a really good job at establishing this idea in people's heads that they know how to make good TV. One thing that's required with all of these, so we think our data shows that there are at least a couple requirements for these platforms, especially as they continue to grow in the number of them. There's some things that we think every platform is going to need to survive. One of those is at least some exclusive content, whether they make it themselves or license it, just some content that people want to watch, and it's the only place that they can find it. It took a long time for the traditional TV companies to catch up on this, but you notice that CBS All Access, for their new Star Trek show, which is really kind of their crown jewel, they sold the streaming rights for that outside the US to Netflix, but in North America, or at least in the US and Canada, the only place you can watch that is on CBS All Access on their own direct-to-consumer platform. And so that's a huge commitment by them of a hugely valuable property that they would get paid a ton of money for with the streaming rights, but they've realized that we're at risk of being disintermediated by the S5 platform, so we really have to put our money where our mouth is and keep ourselves in the game as a company that creates content, not just as one that builds stuff and sells it to Netflix and then they put it on. Another thing that people really require is a deep library. So especially for networks who are trying to watch linear shows, it's really, really hard to get people to tune into a show on your schedule unless they're engaged enough in the content to really care about it. And that's not likely to happen just from watching one episode of a show. Netflix, who never releases data, did release some data a little while ago where they showed the number of episodes that someone would have to watch that would be the best predictor of them finishing an entire season. So basically, where's the inflection point of, after this number of episodes, most people follow through to the end of the season. And it varied a little bit by genre, but the really interesting thing was that there was no genre where it was smaller than about 3. So roughly 3 episodes, at least by their data, is where you get someone engaged enough to finish all the way to the end. You can imagine you probably need to get somebody even a little bit more engaged than that to tune in once a week on linear TV and watch it on network schedule with ads included. So what we tell our clients is that if you want to launch a new show on live TV, you really need to have some amount of content available online to get them engaged with it. And then if you want to launch, if you want to put content online, it's best to put all the seasons, all the episodes of a season all in one place so people don't have to look around to different windows. And some of the networks themselves have done their own research on this. I think this was in 2015 or 2016, Turner with The Last Ship. In some Comcast homes, they put on video on demand all the back seasons with a full episode stack. In the other markets, they had the regular rolling 5 or rolling 7 or whatever it was, but not everything. The linear ratings, the live ratings for the current season of that show were significantly higher in the markets where they put more episodes online for people to catch up, to get more engaged. That seems kind of self-evident, but it's the antithesis of how the TV industry has operated for most of its history. And the fact that they're trying this stuff is a big indication that they're now trying to embrace, that they're putting some pretty big resources into embracing the way that people want to watch rather than resisting it. Which brings me to my last point. The reason that this is such a great environment for independent content is because there are more categories of entertainment to fill, and there's more providers there's more sources that sort of have the permission to fill those. So people spend more time on native digital video. There's more interest in short form video. And interest in short form video means that people are watching on screens and at times and in places where just video entertainment wasn't one of the things that you could do, because you couldn't carry a TV set around with you, or maybe you were somewhere that you didn't have, half an hour minimum to spend. There are more sources accepted as entertainment creators. So we talked about Netflix, as an example, establishing themselves from a distributor into a real entertainment company that makes entertainment I'm really gonna love. We see the same thing happening with YouTube, where it's no longer the place that you go to see, you guys know this, it's no longer the place you go to see cat videos, but average consumers now really expect that they could log on there or onto Facebook or onto Snapchat and find video that's not necessarily exactly the same template as what you see on regular television, but it's video and it's something that's going to engage me and entertain me nonetheless. So people have really bought into that. And we think that the number of people who are watching that, the amount of time that's going to be spent there is only going to climb. And then finally, another big reason that we think this is that traditional providers are beginning to embrace this kind of viewing instead of resisting it. Xfinity, you guys might have heard, which is the biggest provider, and they also make the video on demand interface that is actually being white labeled out to most of the other big MVPDs. Now on video on demand, Netflix content, if you have Netflix, it's incorporated with all your video on demand results, and they just a couple of weeks ago incorporated YouTube. So what that means now is that when you're sitting on the couch and you're, either you're someone that likes to watch videos on YouTube, just don't usually watch them on your TV, or you're someone who doesn't watch that kind of content and would never get exposed to it. When you look up some category, when you talk to your Comcast remote, because the interface is fantastic on that, it'll pull up everything that you're interested in, and mixed in with that will be stuff on YouTube and stuff on Netflix. So that's going to exponentially increase the kinds of people and the number of people that get exposed to this, and there's every reason to think that once they are exposed to it, they're going to become, some of them will become passionate consumers, just like the folks who found it in its early stages. So that is my contact information. I'm happy to take any questions now, or if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to share a copy of this presentation. I'm going to stop talking for a minute.
So you were talking a lot about Big Three and YouTube. You mentioned one of your slides, like a lot of the other smaller platforms. But I was wondering if you had any insights on what they might be looking for, what strategies they're implementing to really try to compete with the big ones, and how as creators we can kind of like.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I think they are competing with them, because to some extent they're, apples and oranges a little bit. But the Vimeos of the world are really interested in attracting independent creators. The Netflix, not so much. They're still very, very big budget. I really think the Studio 71s of the world, or Vimeo, they're in a really good position to. They want that kind of content, and many of those companies now, especially as some of them have sort of publicly not done a great job at it, many of those companies are now doing a much better job of understanding how this property works, and how if you want to commercialize that kind of content, how careful you have to be about how you do that, so that you're not spoiling the thing that got people interested in the first place, or not trying to, not putting sort of commercial interests above the partnership with a creator to make them endorse a product, or try to build some kind of content that they aren't necessarily passionate about, not only because it's not nice, but also just because it's not good business. Anyone else? Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I'm wondering if you know when digital TV might top traditional for people. Because all three levels on that one slide where traditional TV was still the most.
Yeah.
Do you expect that to flip?
I think by the time it flips, I think there won't be really any such things as division anymore. There's a lot of this research that comes out, and they'll say, in 2025, only 15% of millennials say they'll still have a traditional cable subscription. In 2025, nobody's going to have a traditional cable subscription.
Yeah.
They're already just that idea of incorporating Netflix into their own video on demand, that is like a complete 180-degree reversal from really what was a tenet of the whole pay TV industry, which was like never let anybody watch anything we're not getting a piece of it somehow. And they are getting a piece of people that sign up on Netflix. They're probably getting some payment from Netflix just for having it on there, but they're no longer. The pay TV industry spent a long time just trying to grab people by the hair and like say, watch this live now, watch these ads, and otherwise we're going to make it impossible for you to get this content anywhere else. And they're really starting to understand now that you can't kind of, the genie's out of the bottle, you can't resist the way that people want to watch. You just have to, the pay TV industry kind of approaches it from the idea that the worst thing that could ever happen is somebody watches our stuff without getting paid. Netflix comes at it from the idea of like the worst thing that could ever happen is somebody tries to watch something on Netflix and they think it's too hard. So that's why Netflix uses like the consecutive streams while and their memberships are all sort of based on individual relationships with people. The pay TV industry is still based in a legacy way on your household. So when people leave their household and they're like, oh, actually you can't stream this only in your, people are just like, why? What does that even mean? It's not intuitive at all. But they're getting better at it, and I think that before. I think it won't be long before the line between sort of traditional and online TV, which is already pretty blurry, I think that's going to be erased completely pretty soon.
Do you see, do you see conglomeration yet, like, of HBO, Hulu just started offering HBO, and is that starting to happen given these stats?
That's actually a great point. So that's another example of what's going on here. So, as I said, people think there's too many, in addition to all the shows, there's all these different platforms to manage. People have, even if there's really compelling content, people are at kind of the saturation point of how many accounts they want to keep track of and logins and how many kind of little death by 1,000 cuts they want to see on their credit card statement. But what's getting a lot more appealing to people is this aggregation. So another really interesting thing that's happened is AMC Premiere or FX Plus offer commercial-free access to shows on AMC or FX, but you get it through your cable subscription through Comcast. Is the only one that has it right now. But you click on that and add it as an app. You can watch commercial-free shows from all those networks, but it just gets added to your cable bill. There's not another account to manage. I think one of the companies that's actually doing that the best, even though they've been taking a little bit of a hit in the press lately on the quality of their original content. But one of the ones that does it really, really well is Amazon, where they have Amazon channels. Some of if you go down and scroll through those, the ones that you see first are the really high profile ones like Starz, Showtime. But as you go further down the line, there's these hyper specific things you can add, like Shudder, which is independent horror films. There's one on like Eastern lifestyle and yoga. There's one on like live concert documentaries. And there's tons of those, and they're buying up more of them. They're buying up networks that have really hyper-specific content, and it's too specific to ever succeed on live TV because you have to have this group of people that's interested, and then you have to have the Venn diagram of like the time of day that it's on. Like those things have to line up for someone to watch it. But if you remove that time of day, you have a group of really passionate people who will find it wherever it is and watch all of it. And especially if it's only, most of those apps, if you add them on Amazon channels, or I think they're like $2.99. The most expensive one I saw was like $5.99 a month. So that's another thing that lends itself really, really well to a fertile environment for independent content, is that you don't have to have something that's got a massive audience that has to get on live TV and everybody will stop what they're doing and tune in. You just have to have something that has a passionate enough following that people will come and find it where it's on. And there are big companies now that are starting to see the promise of that sort of a business model and are investing in it.
You mentioned that Netflix came out with some data that said once people are watching 3 episodes, they're more likely to be engaged and follow through to watch. Was it the entire season or the entire series?
I can't remember. I think it was the season, but if you Google that, you'll be able to find it. They made it was like a little kind of human interest story kind of thing.
Thanks.
With Disney, since they have their Disney movies anywhere, now it's not just them, but they're partnering with Sony and Warner Brothers and Universal. How do you see that changing consumers, their perception and their use of like Disney or Netflix, since they'll be pulling a lot of their content from?
Yeah, I know that's going to be a tough one because like Netflix is already under pressure because I mean, Netflix could be doing way less well than they are, and they'd still be like an incredibly well-run company, and they're a big client of ours too. But they had the whole market to themselves for like 7 years that no one else was even trying. So a lot of that head start that they have is because they had the foresight to create an entirely new way of watching TV that everybody loves and doesn't cost very much. So everybody did it. And people are now adopting Hulu and Amazon because those also have tons of content and they also don't cost very much. And Netflix is starting to encounter a lot of the competitive pressures that they put on to the TV industry when they came around. So just the fact that, you know, they got outbid for This Is Us by Hulu last week, I think, which is like one of the first times that's happened because they have sort of like the bottomless pit of money. But you know, and that slide I showed you too, where I showed how many people are using 2 or 3 of those platforms together. They're all pretty good. Everybody's making their own individual content now. Nobody has sort of, you know, the killer app of creating TV shows where they can make better TV shows than anybody else can. That's kind of an even playing field. So they're having to compete a lot more. They're facing a lot of the same challenges that they put onto the TV industry when they started. That Disney example is a great example because, especially with that partnership, they're going to be taking, you know, not just a few shows, but they'll be taking a bunch of content off of Netflix. One of the great things about Netflix is that a lot of people say it's their default. It's the first thing that they turn on when they want to watch, and there's a certain amount that once you take it away, you can no longer sort of do all your viewing in one place. You have to use 2 or 3. You know, it's kind of like with the Thin Mints. If you just have one Thin Mint to eat, you're going to eat some other stuff in the meantime if they don't keep you fully stacked with Thin Mints more than you can handle. And I think that's going to be that'll be interesting to see what happens with that amount of content getting taken off and sort of distributed to other places.
You know, Netflix is investing like $7 billion in creating original content. In that respect, I mean, they're creating so much original content that it's almost going to be overwhelming for the consumer and for the content creators to really get a piece of the pie. How do you see that kind of evolving into, like, there's so much original content.
Yeah.
Netflix can't promote all of it all the time.
Well,
It's the big ones.
they might be able to, yeah, they try to.
Right, or how do you see that kind of?
That's another interest. The reason, you know, they're doing that is because they have that stated goal of having at least half of their library to be original. And the reason they need to do that is because they have to wean themselves off of getting all the licensed content from the networks who now have realized what's happening. And in many cases, when they go to the studios, they're requiring full streaming rights as part of the deal for picking up a pilot. So they really need to have more original content just to have stuff to show and not to have to pay a fortune for everything because the rates are getting raised and everybody else is competing. But I do think it's interesting to see, if you go on Netflix now, everything across the whole top row is like Netflix original. So it's not, at first when those Netflix originals came out, they were like kind of novel and people had assumptions that these are going to be really good. And I mean, they are still good shows, but it looks a lot more now like a regular TV network. They also, if you notice, they got rid of the percentage rating. And now it's just kind of like thumbs up or thumbs down for you. And I think the reason that they did that is because if you look at the percentage ratings line up, the highest percentage ones are the ones that line up with the shows that did the best on regular TV, because that's the ones that people want to watch. And that is steering people to stuff that they don't own, and also the most expensive stuff that they don't own.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Is it really true that people have the same amount of time for TV?
We haven't seen it going down. Like we track, not really, no. I mean, we know the ratings are going down for things, you know, like the NFL. I think a lot of stuff is like video games for certain groups of people sucks a lot of time out. At least in the studies, you know. But again, remember that we're just talking to people who are at least somewhat engaged in TV anyway. At least 5 hours a week. So the amount of time they say they spend on TV is pretty stable. People's ability to estimate how much time they spend doing anything is not awesome most of the time, but at least in their own heads, they're spending as much time watching TV as they have before.
Okay, can we take one more?
I think we're good.
One more question?